Hey guys, welcome back. BDCKR here. We're back with our weekly Q&A content. You're probably on YouTube right now, so if you are, you can check out links in the description to get this on a bunch of different podcasting platforms. And if you're on one of the podcasting platforms, you probably found us through YouTube, and you also probably are there very specifically, so I don't need to tell you about the YouTube video, because I doubt you're going to watch it.
Right.
You're getting it in the form that is best for you already, I imagine.
Right.
Yeah. Before we get into questions, we want to talk a little bit. There's one thing that's kind of happened.
All right, so we missed last week.
Yeah.
We were actually...
For good reason, I would say.
Yeah, I was post-op. I just had surgery that day. I don't know if I want to get into too much of the personal details, but what is interesting to me, and I was reflecting on this a bit, is that the kind of flack that the single-payer system in Canada, not ideal by any means, but the kind of flack that the single-payer healthcare system in Canada gets from Americans. It's it amazes me how much the insurance companies have convinced Americans that it is better to have what they call choice when really they don't have choice. Like when your options are limited financially because you just can't afford certain things, it doesn't matter who's deciding what you get. By default, you're not getting the quickest service anyways if you're not getting what you should because your insurance company won't pay for it and it's priced out of your budget.
Yeah. And I mean, one of the things is that when you have like a supply issue, right? Because I think that's one of the big criticisms of healthcare in Canada, right? Which is that there's not enough doctors, that wait times are too long, that they don't have enough infrastructure,
but
right?
It's not it's not, there's no nuance there. When you say it's too long, you got
relatively.
Depending on what it is.
Yeah. But, those are often what the complaints are, right?
Right.
And I think what's interesting is that I think that still doesn't make the American healthcare system better. The fact that it is distributed unevenly so that there are still sort of issues with people getting services, right? There are way more people waiting longer or going without care or whatever else in the US. And in Canada, if there's an issue, you can address it on a sort of global overall level, right? You can get more doctors, it's a more fixable problem. Because it's not even quite even, right? If you think about like people living in rural areas or like geographically, there are still like differences in quality of care, certainly. And the fact that we live so close to Toronto, right, means that relatively speaking, we have access to a lot more healthcare options and a lot more choice, but also we have a lot more sort of direct talent. Like I think about mental health care, right? We have CAMH, which is, I think, one of the better and more sophisticated mental health facilities in Canada, just generally.
We have hospital for sick children. Yeah. We have St. Mike's and Sunnybrook, two of the best trauma centers in Canada. So here's the thing,
so
right?
in some ways, it's that, but what I'm saying is that, like, it's a much more addressable problem than, like, it's when it's global and it's a lot more equally distributed of, it's too long.
Well, I'm going to take a different tack, actually. I think when you've got a supply problem, you've got a supply problem. Yeah. Nothing changes. So it becomes an issue of, well, how do you notice that lack of supply? And in the States, it's distributed unfairly for people who are poor. Yeah. And in Canada, it's distributed unfairly for people who have a non-urgent problem. Mm-hmm. I think what Canada does really well is prioritize. So the shortages or where you run into trouble are a result of triage. Mm-hmm. So that the urgent stuff gets taken care of. And people who wait a long time, when they're complaining, well, it took me so long to see a specialist to do whatever, it's the non-urgent stuff. It's stuff that can't wait.
Or usually less urgent.
Well, when you look at it from a mortality perspective, I think there's certain things that are where people suffer and it affects their quality of life hugely, but they do have to wait because of supply. Like joint replacement surgery. The fact that you have to wait for it, because normally joints, like when you need a joint replacement, you are done. Like all your options do not work. When your hips or your knees don't work properly, then getting around anywhere hurts. You're clearly not living your best life. Yeah. And you are, until you get surgery, you're basically screwed in certain ways, right? Like you just can't participate in everyday life the way you're used to. And listen, there are things that you can do to make up for it, right? There's supports. And what do you call those? assistive devices.
Yeah.
But it's when Americans criticize the Canadian healthcare system, it's on the basis of where the shortages are in areas like that. But Canada is amazing for dealing with urgent stuff and not turning people away, getting it done, cheaper per capita cost, and better outcomes.
Yeah.
So, I've been sitting recovering from surgery for last week, so I've had a lot of time to reflect on it. And I think, not perfect by any means, when there's definitely a shortage of both supply, like the resource that you need, like directly, plus the resource that you need to pay for the resource. You know what I mean? Like a second level, what do you call it? Like once removed, a resource once removed, because it's money. You need more money. You would have more resources available if you had more money, but it would be an investment of schooling, expanding nursing schools, expanding medical schools, paying for the doctors and nurses and other allied healthcare professionals that we need. And when you've got governments that have a 4-year term, I think the motivation to actually do stuff, this is what bugs me the most about what people generally refer to as the conservative platform is it's all based on spending less money. And that only gets you so far if you really don't care about any of the services that are paid for with that money.
It's true. Yeah. It's the problem is that you're reducing a lot of complexity down to basically a number.
Yeah.
And it's a lot easier to sort of hold on to a number, right? It's very easy to work with it, but it's not more accurate or more valuable or more useful in that form, right? It's a better
soundbite.
Yeah,
that's the problem.
But it's also a lot simpler. It's very easy to wrap your head around.
That's
we're spending X amount of money.
Yeah.
In the future, we want to spend X amount of money, and it sounds good, and you can compress a lot of context and complexity into basically nothing.
Right.
Yeah.
So I think this is probably where my biggest distrust of whatever platform the current conservative / reform / alliance party is going. Like anytime the basis of your platform is just cutting costs, no nuance, spend less money, I'm not a big fan. I think there's certain areas, you can cut money, but the idea that somehow that you can the big sort of bugaboo is cutting down waste.
Yeah.
I mean, at some point you just can't do that, right? Like what we're seeing that in Ontario with the secondary schools, where there's been a freeze since I think 2019 on tuition. So the government's mandated tuition, and they've cut back on the money they're giving to universities. And now they're limiting the number of foreign students, where universities were making up the money by charging them more to actually pay for the stuff that they needed. So what the provincial government is doing is basically undermining and destroying the post-secondary school system. Anyway,
that is unfortunate.
Yeah.
One other thing I wanted to mention really quickly. I have recently been rewatching some of OK Go's music videos. I feel like every once in a while I am reminded of them and then go back and see a couple of my favorites.
Right.
But they specifically are reposting their music videos to like TikTok and like other like sort of video platforms.
Right.
And they have little sort of captions where they're talking through the process of it. Not like talking through it, I guess they're writing through the process of it. So they go, oh, like this is that, this is how we did this,
track.
Whatever. Yeah, it's a director's commentary in essentially like subtitles or captions. And so it's been great because I like those videos a lot. I would go back and rewatch them anyways, but it's a little extra thing for somebody who knows both what's happening in the videos and the music, right?
Yeah.
There's actually something new that I can engage with sort of most actively, and it's a good way of going back through them. But those videos are cool, man.
Yeah.
They have just done so many different really, really interesting things.
Well, the things that they were aiming for and the things they achieved were both interesting, right?
Yeah.
Like sometimes you see this with a lot of media. Sometimes you watch a movie, everybody's been saying how great it is because all these things they're trying to do.
Yeah.
And it is, but maybe it's not so good.
Yeah.
And then you watch a movie that people sort of crap on because they say, well, it's nothing new, it's just the same old. But if they do it really well, I still enjoy it.
Yeah.
Case in point is, there's, I'm not generally a fan of rom-coms. I've seen a few. They're okay. There's nothing really, enlightening or no big revelations in them. But there was one that I really like, Return to Me, that Bonnie Hunt directed. And it's just done really, really well.
Yeah.
And there's something to be said when it's something that you've had before, but it's done really, really well. I can still get behind it. But when something's has a really great concept and it's done well, those are the things like, okay, but really stand out and sort of withstand the test of time.
And I think definitely one of the things that make their stuff work, I mean, I'm also looking at their process. They have, I forget if they call it like a play box or a sandbox or a playroom or something, but their approach is basically they have half of a good idea, right?
Okay.
So for one of their songs, they have a line called "Gravity's just a habit that you're pretty sure you can break." I think it's their song "Upside Down." At least that's the starting verse of the chorus.
Okay.
And so their idea for that music video was, let's do it in zero gravity.
That was the one where they did it on that
on the
vomit
plane.
comet.
Yeah, the vomit comet.
Yeah.
And so but apparently, like, for however long they had it for like 5 days or whatever. I don't remember. I think they had like 30 flights scheduled, and they spent like multiple days in a bunch of different flights, just going up with different objects and items and just messing around, right? So they had all these things that they thought might work. They had this idea of doing it in zero gravity, and then they built out sort of, it's not exactly choreography, but for a video like that, right? They built out a lot of the specifics of the spectacle,
right,
based off of what did and didn't work, because they said, we just need to do it. We need to play around and see what's fun and see what looks good. And so you go in there with kind of like half of an idea, right?
Right.
We're doing it in zero gravity. We're going to be throwing a bunch of stuff around. We're going to be having maybe fluids because those will look cool. We're going to have this, whatever. But a lot of the specifics are not there yet. Right. And then they have enough resources that they can experiment with stuff that most people wouldn't even have access to in the first place, right? They can do all their experiments in zero grav.
Right.
So it's a mix of sort of that dedication to playing and being flexible, but also the resources to have the energy to do that and the space to do that with stuff that most people don't have.
Right.
Yeah. But good videos, really cool stuff. Right. If you haven't seen their stuff, go on a little rabbit hole and watch like all the big OK Go music videos. There's they're always interesting, and the songs, I mean, they're good musicians too. Right. I probably wouldn't listen to them nearly as much if it weren't for the music videos in the first place, but once those got me in the door, I do like their stuff.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Anyways, let's get
into
the
Injustice
actual
stuff.
Yeah,
and
the content of it.
Before we get to the questions, I mean, this is season 11, which is informally the season of the Lost challenge characters. Mm-hmm. And this week, so I should mention, so if you want to see the dates of all the previous Lost challenge characters that we've done recently, will be in the description. Mm-hmm. And this week is Red Sun Batman. And okay, so low stats. Lowish, 900 attack, 1000 health. His passive is Red Sun Cunning. All Red Sun teammates gain chance for unblockable on special 1 attacks. So what's neat is, all right, so his special 2 does a decent amount of balance damage. It's multi-hit, and that would normally be really good, except his attack is relatively low. He is a good candidate for boosting his attack stat or promoting him past Elite 7 to make him competitive against some of the newer characters the higher stat characters you're going to face in multiplayer. And because he's got a lot of hits on his special 1, it's effectively, because I believe that the chance for unblockable on special 1 attacks is for each hit. Mm-hmm. You're essentially getting an unblockable special 1 pretty much every time. The amount of damage you get is questionable, but the fact that it will eventually land unblocked on last hit, that's not really in doubt. Mm-hmm. The problem is the chance of stun on special 1 it feels like it's relatively low. It's definitely not 100%. And there's too many times where you do your special 1, maybe like, I feel like 1 in 4 is not going to stun. Mm-hmm. So the strategy we've got with him is, even though he plays a lot like Static, in that you're basically when you're playing him with Rebirth Raven, he's going to set up Rebirth Raven to come in and drop a bomb by stealing the opponent's stealing the opponent's power, and then doing a boosted damage special 1. You still really need 2 bars of power when you come in to make sure that you're going to get your stun to let Raven really wipe them out. What's better with him compared to Static is that even without Master's Death card effect, that the gear shatter, if you play him with Claw of Horus, you're potentially shattering twice. Mm-hmm. So each time is a 75% chance, so you're getting to roll that die twice. The team sort of composition you're seeing is the usual one of our usual ones. So it's got Hawkgirl to make the tag-ins faster, which no matter what else you got, whatever kind of team synergy you're looking for, if you're playing Tantu Totem, I don't think there's any other ability that is as universally useful as being able to come in and out whenever you need to. Mm-hmm. Rebirth Raven is interesting because you think, okay, so one of the biggest advantages of Red Sun team is Red Sun Green Lantern, where he makes it so that you can't be stunned, basically, like essentially, but not, it doesn't protect you against Batgirl, where she stuns in the middle of the special. You will still be stunned by that. But because you also don't get crit damage against you, that doesn't hurt nearly as much. And in general, you're just way tankier, way hardier, and tougher. But there's that huge advantage of Rebirth Raven, especially since Batman is doing a multi-hit special 1. It's mostly landing unblocked, and you're going to be giving the opponent a bunch of power. Mm-hmm. And I think the defensive advantage of stealing the opponent's power is so much better than making the opponent not be able to do crit damage with their special attacks. Mm-hmm. or any attacks, I guess. Because most of the time, if you play it right, if you build your team with the offensive output as your main priority, then that kind of protection against critical hits isn't nearly as important.
So there we go.
Yeah. And I guess we're the one thing we're trying differently with Rebirth Raven on this team is that she's only got Cloak of Destiny. She doesn't have Necron Scythe as a way to double boost stun damage. And you're really seeing that it doesn't matter. I mean, some of the times she won't knock the opponent out. Most of the time she does. And giving Rebirth Raven that second, filling it with that second slot, it only helps you against the character that's stunned. It doesn't really help you that much. And because she hits so hard that she's knocking out, when she's stacking both of them, she's knocking them out and doing a bunch of the rest of her damage against the next opponent. That next opponent isn't stunned. Mm. All of a sudden you lose that effect. So if you use something that's a little bit more generic, like we are with potentially with the Kryptonian rifle, you're going to end up doing more overall damage, because then you're getting more on the second guy. Or what I really love is the Enchantress gear, where the skulls, because they're dropping down, they are protecting whoever's standing there when the next opponent tags in, to keep them from using the power that they've got. So we have a chance to, you'll see it in a couple fights. So if Rebirth even drops a special, skulls are about to come in, she tags out, Red Sun Batman comes in, shatters all their gear. He's still fast enough as he finishes a special 1 for Rebirth Raven to tag back in and steal the power from that opponent that was there, even though they might have dropped in with some power because the skull saved us.
Yeah. There you go.
So I guess the verdict is good character, pretty effective. Main weakness is the low stats. So if you have him on a team and you want to make the most of him, he's not a great on a not Red Sun team, he's not a great supporting character. He is pretty good, second best, I think, on a second or third best on a Red Sun team. So if you're going to really use him as the star, though, you're going to have to do a little bit more than use the plain vanilla maxed out at 50 and Elite 7. You got to do a little bit more to make him useful.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So we have a comment from KeyWiz31. it was a 2-part question. We only answered part 1, and it was a little while ago.
I should admit, like, I don't. So here's what Keywiz said is, thanks for your answer in one of the previous videos. I finally found a way to listen to the end of discussion. The sound messed up in the video, if you remember. Now waiting for the answer to the second part of my question from that video. Thanks in advance. I appreciate the reminder because I
had forgotten.
Totally forgot. If that comment hadn't come out, I don't know that I would have made the effort to go back and figure out which question it was and what we'd done with it.
Yeah, so the question, though, is, and this is the second part of a longer comment, but we're only going to read the stuff that's new, which is on Hawkgirl and Rebirth Raven. I agree with you that there are a couple characters, Red Lantern as well, that will let almost any character shine as the main damage dealer, especially if that third character does not have his own synergy or team needed to perform. And it is fair when you use a lot of different characters as main damage dealers to put them in the same team to rate their ability to carry fairly. But surely there are characters / setups that benefit much more from having Red Lantern or Hawkgirl Prime or Rebirth Raven on their team than others. I loved using the team with Static, Raven, and Hawkgirl, and even though I do not even have Raven crit maxed, they are really effective, and it is a fun, unconventional strategy that requires those specific characters to work as good as they could. But someone like Animated Batman, as I see him, does not care much who his teammates are as long as he has 2 bars of power to use a couple of special too. I am raising that topic as I'm planning to grind hard for Arkham Origins Deathstroke coming next week in multiplayer, outdated now obviously, and it's not only the issue of energy refill cards that I will not have enough to use Hawkgirl on every team, but also the fun aspect of using different characters not only as carries, but also as supports. Not sure what the point I was trying to make at this point, or sorry, not sure what was the point I was trying to make at this point, but I think I put enough here for you to ramble about. Thanks. And Keywiz knows us. I think that's more than enough for us to ramble about.
Yeah. And if we have a little bit of time, I think we might go back to the previous one. I feel like we never really addressed that. I can't remember how far we actually got with the whole comment.
Okay, so you'll let me know at the end if you want to go back and talk more.
So, I mean, the one thing that jumps out at me from the comment is the unconventional strategy. So, yeah, we could call it that, but I think part of it is how much we as players expect to be led by what the developers have done. And by that I mean, so the number of times that people put all 3 LexCorp gears on somebody, or put all 3 League of Assassins gears on somebody, or all 3 Suicide Squad or Fourth World, people do that.
Yeah.
I think people who are willing to just let the developers guide their experience by saying, okay, so, well, these gears have a synergy, they have an extra ability, well, it must be worth doing. Or these characters are in the same universe, they have the same name, maybe they have a little bit of synergy, well, that's what we'll do. So, yeah, so maybe there is a little bit of convention there, but I feel like that we've gotten far enough that we've been playing, and when I say we, I mean the collective we, the community has been playing Injustice for long enough that there's certain things that we do differently that are now conventional.
Yeah. Well, it's funny even looking at the word sort of conventional, right? Unconventional and conventional. Because what is a convention? It's a guideline sort of thing. It's not exactly a guideline. It's not exactly a rule, right? It's a common and known way of doing stuff. And,
or a way that people tend to do stuff that people just are doing for
and so there
reason.
are sort of 2 places that conventions can come from, right? One place is obviously sort of from above, right? From some sort of organizing body. And so when we talk about conventions, right? Injustice has established conventions like team composition conventions, gear conventions, right? By creating effects that are explicitly paired together, right? So like almost by definition, it's a convention to use all 3 League of Assassins gear in a set, right?
Right.
But also, you know, players can create conventions, and that's based off of sort of the patterns of play and the way that we share information and then the choices that we individually make. Right. So conventions sort of come from those 2 layers, and that, like, the full gear set, right, is kind of a convention that's being imposed by the developer. I say imposed because it's being provided by the developer, right? But for us at least, and when you look at people who are sort of trying to optimize their gear loadouts, it's a convention to use 2 pieces and not the full set, right? Because you're getting sort of the stuff that is most valuable out of it.
Or just one.
Or one, that's true.
League of Assassins gears, there's one that's clearly so much better than the others, and that's the knives. The 50%, that single ability out of the 3, or if you look at the boosted ones, like potentially 5 abilities, the splash damage on special 1 of 50% is so much better than any of the other abilities.
Yeah.
So, and I feel like, I mean, I don't know, because I know that we don't hew to the conversation necessarily of how people are setting up teams, like other people are setting up teams. I feel like that we were one of the first to use the static rebirth Raven sort of coupling because of the obvious synergy that we've talked about before, where his special 1 does a lot of hits, gives the opponent a lot of power if it's unblocked, but stuns at the end. And Rebirth Raven is the perfect antidote to that. And I mean, we've pushed it enough that it's probably, people may not remember seeing it from what we've done, but I feel like we pushed it earlier than most people did because it just made a lot of sense.
So in a way, we helped build conventions in the game.
I think so.
Helped is, I think, the fair word to say, because we are a small part of it, right?
Right.
We do sort of stuff that does reach other members of the community, so in that way we share information, right?
Right.
And as much as you can sort of track that down, we are a known source of some stuff sometimes, right?
Right.
And even if we're not the first people to do stuff, because there's no real way of sort of confirming that, right?
Right.
We are often, usually one of one sort of examples for the time that we started talking about it for some stuff.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And I think if we're going to be looking at that kind of thing, the flavor of the question is not answering it exactly, but the flavor question of, well, what combination is good? If you take as a given, which we do, but not everybody does, right? And that might be a little bit unconventional, is that Hawkgirl and Rebirth Raven are S tier characters in multiplayer. Yeah. Right? They're often not ranked that way, but they are 2 of the absolute best, because basically on any team with those 2, you can slot in a third character that has offensive potential, and you're going to maximize the offensive potential for that character and for that team.
Yeah.
Then the other one that you're seeing is this week is Red Sun Batman, because maybe all of the different skins of Batman have the ability to trigger Claw of Horus more than once at the end of their special 1. But Red Sun Batman is the only one that's got that unblockable special 1 chance. And that makes him maybe marginally better than Static as I want to say, like in a comedy, the straight man for Rebirth Raven. And it sets her up beautifully pretty much every time to smoke the other team, even when power generation is dampened. And I think this is probably a good example of that. If you're looking at, as Kiwis was mentioning about different kind of interactions, the best ones are the ones that aren't expected. And I think if we're going to direct you to videos that we've done like that, we've got a playlist of just fun interactions. Some of them have been patched. Some of them are hard to reproduce. All of them are fun, where you get something really weird happening on screen. And it's, anyways, we'll link it in the description. You should take a look if you enjoy those kind of videos where it's not necessarily just, motoring through multiplayer and getting a lot of points.
So there we go. Do we want to do the first part of the question, you think?
Yeah, why don't we? Okay. Or the second part. There were sort of 3 big parts, right?
The top of it is more of just something to respond to and not a question.
Yeah.
So, Kiwiz said, also, there are a couple questions I wanted to ask. First, I think you mentioned you were going to play with every single character as the main damage dealer, but would you also ever feature challenge characters like Antimatter, Sinestro, Yellow Hell, etc.? Some of them seem really hard to obtain on high promotion levels for most players, and it would be cool if you did a similar playtest with those characters to maybe get a sense of how good they are, not only by theory of reading their passes or playing against them, but actual first-hand experience of a competent player, weird animations, interactions, etc. And I think we did talk about this initially,
now you're saying it sounds familiar.
Weird animations and interactions, but you said you had new thoughts?
Well, I just think I had added thoughts. I mean, Antimatter, Sinestro, and how Yellow Lantern, Hal Jordan aren't just rare characters. I want to point out they're not just rare characters. They are actually part of the Lost Challenge characters. They're the ones that haven't been around since before May 2020.
Okay.
So I think we will get around to that. So they're not just hard to get. I think some of them, maybe they're available in the challenge pack.
Yeah, would we consider doing stuff like, you can't link your WBID anymore, can you?
Not
for like the rewards
console.
for the console.
Not the console, right?
So
right.
then, is Prison Superman still available anywhere?
I don't think so, except, well, maybe in the challenge packs as a rare drop.
Yeah, so would we consider going back and doing sort of some of those characters after, and some just characters that people might not have seen or would have a hard time getting? Part of the problem is that, for these it at least makes sense because we were doing challenge characters before, but you kind of reach a level where you're just giving people FOMO, potentially, right? So it's exposing them to new stuff, which is on one hand cool, but it's exposing the new stuff that they can't have, which is on maybe not as cool.
Right, but I think there's probably a lot more interest in the challenge characters than anybody else, and we probably could get around to doing some of the characters in the store.
Yeah,
would be kind of fun. It's a matter of trying to figure out a way to fit it in, because unless we started replacing our weekly recap where we do the current challenge character, our main way of doing it is where we are now in our Q&A. And it's going to take us a few months to get through the Lost Challenge characters. Yeah. And then maybe some of the other ones that aren't challenge characters, like the metal characters, before we end up getting to maybe guys that we haven't talked about for a long, long time or ever. Yeah. Do you remember the times that we did low or no gear teams? And then I think we had a cyborg, Teen Titan Cyborg team, like just for the heck of it, right? To say, well, listen, they're still okay if you've got the gear. Yeah,
so I guess that's a solid maybe, right? We'll probably be looking for some new stuff to do once we get through those lists, and it seems logical. It was logical to go from challenge characters that were there to challenge characters that aren't. And it seems logical to jump afterwards to something that is uncommon in one way or another, either uncommonly used and just available in the store, or uncommon as in hard to get now.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So, we can see it happening. And that probably is a great place to end this week. To finish up, we'd like to give a huge thank you to our wonderful patrons on Patreon.
That would be Michael Devries, Irvin Ruiz, Hoshi127, and Nora Klimek, who are supporting us on the credited level. And the other names that you see on the screen are people who were generous enough to have supported us at some point during the pandemic.
So, a huge thank you to all of you for your support, and a significant but much smaller thank you to everybody else who's made it to the end of this video.
That sounds ungenerous of us.
I am appreciative that people watch us at all. Yes. I find it surprising, and I am grateful, and it is cool. It is a nice feeling, right?
Right.
I know that even for the relatively low number of views we get, that there are a much smaller number of people who make it all the way to the end of the video. So if you spent all this time and hung out with us and listened to us, that is cool, and genuinely that deserves a thank you.
Right.
But it is hard not to be sort of shocked and surprised and really appreciative. Like, in the same way I'm surprised that people watch us and people make it to the end of the video, I am I'm even more surprised.
Fair enough.
So they're all big thank yous. It's all a cool feeling. It's all nice, right?
Right.
But it is on a different level, and it's,
fair enough.
Not that I'm sitting there going like, all I care about is the money. It's just it's a way of sort of understanding how much people like us in a different way,
right?
Which is harder to express. I mean, people who comment a lot, right? People who are regular commenters and members of the community, I also appreciate a lot more than somebody who just watches a video, because they're visible to me and I can see it and point it out. And the Patreon support is basically the same thing, right? It's a different version of the same kind of thing.
That's fair.
Yeah. So thank you to everybody.
Yes.
to sum it up. And we will see you next time.
Komoda.